Now, you're probably thinking, I can't buy a house anymore in a capital city in Australia. It's far too expensive. I can only spend 400k, 500k, 600k, 700k, maybe 800k. There is no way I can afford anything anytime soon. So that begs the question, should you buy a townhouse, either for living or for investment purposes? But wait, PK, don't apartments and townhouses not grow as much as houses? Well, that's what we'll be answering with data in this episode. Should you buy a townhouse? The pros, the cons, because what I'm seeing is a big shift, and you're going to want to know about this. Welcome to the Oz Property Investment Mastery Podcast. My name's PK and I help busy people build passive income by buying top 5% growth and cash flow property and build a portfolio using data without wasting months doing research, spending weekends at inspection or catching flights, or dropping $10,000 to $20,000 on buyer's agents every single time. So if you're confused, lack confidence, and just overwhelmed with all the information and marketing misinformation available online and don't know where to start, then this show is for you. Let's get into a really interesting one straight away from Longview. Relative change in median established house and unit prices for Melbourne 2008 to 2022. Now, Melbourne I'm using as a proxy for the rest of the country, and when I tested this, it's actually a fairly good proxy. So what this is showing is that houses using 2008 as a baseline in the pink have grown the most over this time period, 2008 to 2022. Townhouses in the blue have done relatively well and come basically second after houses in that time period. Houses have gone up 160%, townhouses. Medium density apartments have also gone up about 200 or just below that since 2008. And high density apartments, like skyscrapers, tower blocks, places like Docklands, etc., have gone up only 150%. So already we know we should completely ignore high density apartments and also not buy medium density apartments. But the question is, well, townhouses have underperformed houses, so why even go further into exploring? Why not just cancel out all townhouses altogether as clearly inferior to houses? Well, the answer to that is within townhouses, you've got different varieties. Let's get into it. Now, back in 2022, I was featured in realestate.com.au, Investors' 3 Best and Worst Post-Pandemic Brisbane Suburbs. You can go back to this article and actually see if I was right or not. But zooming into the relevant part, he said suburbs, they're referring to me, where townhouses and villas hadn't performed over the last few decades were now among the hottest properties amongst house hunters, especially suburbs close to employment hubs. I think, this is me, the better opportunity is more in the townhouse dwelling types in the Brisbane context. Not so much inner city, but 10 to 15 kilometres north and south of the river, places like Clayfield, Northgate and Tagum. I think they will outperform because of the land component. Good value of land as proportion to dwelling price. They will outperform units in the city, and also land is scarce. Now fast forward to seeing what actually happened in those suburbs. This is Tagum from On the House. When I made those predictions in kind of mid-2022, we were at below or around 450k per unit. Now, since that time, prices have gone up to basically 600k. So that's a $150,000 rise since I made those predictions on realestate.com.au. Now, it must be said that this includes all units in Tagum. This website doesn't give me the ability to just look at townhouses as opposed to huge unit blocks, which there are many in Tagum. So if you strip that out and see the on-the-ground reality, you actually find that the price growth for townhouses has actually been more in the vicinity of $300,000, clearly outperforming units. Now you may say, that was the COVID boom, PK, everything went up. Well, actually in 2022, start of 2023, Brisbane house prices actually came down. So what we were able to do is find a suburb and a particular dwelling type that not only bucked the trend for the city, but actually outperformed in terms of national averages. The key thing here to explore further is which type of townhouses performed others. Now, here's a type of townhouse dwelling type that I would recommend you avoid. They're all in one complex. Now, the downside of that is there's always multiple townhouses available for rent and for sale at any one time. That means there's competition amongst sellers and landlords. Therefore, rents don't rise as much all the time. And when you go to revalue or sell your property, it may not get top dollar because there's always so much competition. It's a classic example of lack of scarcity. To top that off, you've got, if I zoom in right here, a pool, a tennis court. I mean, this one's not even that bad. There's only one pool, there's only one tennis court. Sometimes these complexes have gyms, have pools, multiple tennis courts, other recreation activities and areas, and that really increases the body corp or strata. Body corp or strata is a fee that every owner of a townhouse in this complex has to pay for the upkeep of the overall environment, the landscaping, the facilities, common shared driveways, the roads, etc. It can be a lot of money. It does include insurance, but most times it costs way more than what you would just pay for insurance directly in a freestanding or different type of townhouse, which I'm going to show you in a second. Plus, if something goes wrong with the pool or something goes wrong with this area, there may be unexpected costs that all the owners are expected to chip in. And if there isn't a sufficiently large sinking fund, then you may be up for thousands of dollars unexpectedly on some years, which really takes away from the cash flow. So this is an example of a townhouse complex with no scarcity, additional costs that you want to try to avoid. And this is an example of a townhouse that actually you should consider. Now, I'm not saying go off and buy this. There's so many factors to consider that I teach my clients beyond suburb selection: the right property, the right street, the right side of the street, the right aspects of the property. I'm not going into all that right now, but just the type of dwelling. This is a type of townhouse that I think will do well. It's just the scarcity aspect of it. Here's the entrance here, bit blurry. There's only 4 here, so there's not going to be a whole lot of competition between the owners when it comes to selling or renting. And it's this type of townhouse that has completely outperformed the average for units, which includes townhouses, in Tagum. Now, the great thing about townhouses is that they have higher yields or higher cash flow than traditional detached dwellings. Check this out. It shows the property compounding annual growth rate from 1986 to 2021 and yield as of 2021 for some cities, both locally in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and internationally. What you find is our cities generally have lower yields, sub 4, sub 3% yields, yet have the highest capital growth amongst their peers internationally. So what townhouses allow you to do, tap into these high growth markets without copying such poor yields, because yields for townhouses, even in capital cities, can be 5%, 6%, 7%, even higher as well. And the reason their yields are higher than the detached houses is because tenants tend to pay for the house, the dwelling, the built up area. That's what they use. They don't really want to pay for a huge block because that's what's growing in value, but they're not using it, they're not owning it, so they just want to pay for mostly the interior dwelling of the house. That's why units and townhouses generally have higher yields than houses. That doesn't mean we should just go for any townhouse or unit just because it has higher yields, because at the end of the day, it's capital growth. That's the engine of our wealth creation. But right now, and I don't know how long this will last for, you can still buy in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane townhouses, like I just showed you before, scarce townhouses for under 600, under 700, under 800, under $1 million, and still tap into that amazing growth. By the way, just because they've got Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane here, that doesn't mean that Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane grow any more than other places in Australia, including many regional areas. But you want to be super, super, super careful before buying a townhouse in a regional area, because the growth trajectory in regional areas for townhouses isn't really always the same as higher density capital cities. This is the one time I would say capital cities sometimes outperform regional centers in this particular dwelling type, townhouses. In fact, townhouses could be the thesis for property investors in Australia going forward, maybe starting now, maybe starting in 5 years, as we see housing affordability become poorer and poorer. Check it out, New South Wales, 58.5%. That's how much the mortgage repayments are costing out of people's household salaries. 46% Victoria, Queensland 45%, South Australia 44%, WA 36%, Tasmania 43%, Northern Territory 33%, ACT 35%. So as this yellow bar gets higher and higher across the different states, the general population, including owner-occupiers, are going to be looking more and more so towards townhouses. In fact, that's already happening. So as investors, we can see this opportunity. 10 years ago, it would be a terrible idea to buy a townhouse for investment purposes in Brisbane, but now even Brisbane is becoming more like Sydney and Melbourne from an affordability perspective, and the scarce, high land quotient townhouses where the land to asset ratio is at least 45 to 50%, if not more. And I teach my clients how to find these, how to calculate this. Those can perform just as well as detached houses over time in the right suburbs. And by the way, never buy them brand new. I did a video maybe 2 or 3 years ago, new versus old property. Put it into YouTube, PK Gupta as a search term. You'll find why, generally speaking, you shouldn't buy any property for set and forget, buy and hold purposes. That's brand new house and land package, off the plan apartment, or brand new townhouse. Another reason I'm bullish on townhouses going forward is that the density of population in Australia is not only really high, but it's getting higher and higher. What the hell? Isn't Australia a big landmass with people living only in small coastal areas? Well, that's true, but check this out. Number of cities totaling 50% of the country's population. All right, in Australia, it takes just 3 cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, to total 50% of Australia's population. In the United Kingdom, that is 9. In the United States, that's 37. Okay, they've got a much bigger population than us, of course, almost 400 million, but it's much more dispersed across many big capital cities. Whereas in Australia, more than 50% of the population live in just 3 capital cities. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's not like the government's building high-speed rail or really investing in massive employment and infrastructure for other locations. So this means the density of population will just get more and more, and therefore, as housing affordability becomes basically impossible for the average person, they'll look to townhouses. And once again, that's an opportunity for investors to get in early in this big shift and make a lot of money. The point I'm trying to make is that if you really do want to buy in the 3 big capital cities and you can't afford freestanding homes, then don't be shy of buying townhouses. I'm not saying out in like Schofields, right? I'm not saying out in Hoppers Crossing, Northwest Sydney, Western Melbourne, but well-established, scarce, high land to asset ratio, low body corporate villas or townhouses. And in fact, they're already growing really swiftly. So from Matusik in 2020, attached dwellings, townhouses or units, 38% of them were under 500K. Now, fast forward to 2024, there's only 31% of them that are under 500K. So you can see they are clearly going up in value. And in fact, he's predicting Sydney attached dwellings to go up 5 to 7% in the next 12 months. Melbourne to basically be flat or backwards. Adelaide to be 10 to 13% up in the next 12 months. Brisbane 7 to 10%. Perth 12 to 15%. Canberra 0 to 2%. Hobart -5 to -2, Darwin 0 to 2%, and overall townhouses and units in capital cities to go up next 12 months 3 to 6%. Now, of course, this table includes units, and so if you strip that out, the higher land quotient, scarce townhouse variety that I illustrated before will be much higher than these growth projections. The summary is don't be shy of investing in townhouses as long as they're the right type, in the right city, and in the right density of location. That doesn't mean we buy a townhouse in some regional location with a population of 10,000. The thesis exists on the bedrock of capital cities, higher density, and the right variety. Done your due diligence, and they can perform just as well as houses over the long term. But that does not mean you buy a brand new townhouse in the far outskirts of Western or Northwestern Sydney. I still recommend buying detached houses, whether they're capital cities or the right regional locations, But if you really do want to buy in Melbourne, Sydney, or Brisbane, then townhouses have a lot of potential. Watch this space, and in 10 years' time, you might thank yourself for taking action based on this episode. For so much more free knowledge, I'll leave links below to my Facebook group with more than 50,000 amazing community members, Oz Property Mastery with PK. Join, learn, grow, succeed. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.